the early 1970s, the Indian government encouraged foreign companies to invest and build factories in India to help local economies throughout the country who were suffering with high unemployment and systemic poverty. Union Carbide, one of the most prominent chemical companies in the world at that time, became one of the first foreign companies to invest in India. As a result of this government initiative, Union Carbide would employ as many as 9,000 people throughout 14 plants within India. One of those plants was located in the city of Bhopal in the state of Madhya Pradesh. The Bhopal plant was created in order to produce a pesticide named Sevin. The Sevin produced at the Bhopal plant was used throughout India's agricultural sector in order to increase agricultural productivity and provide more food for the highly populated country. By building a plant in Bhopal, Union Carbide was utilizing their right to economic empowerment, seizing upon a ready workforce and markets for their product. National and local Indian governments were likewise exercising their right to foster industry and development as means to help their long-suffering citizens trapped in poverty with little or no economic opportunities. Initially, the Bhopal plant seemed to benefit all interested parties, as it led to the creation of thousands of jobs and produced a pesticide used by local farmers to increase food production for India's hungry citizens. However, one night in December of 1984, all of the hope and promise the Bhopal plant brought was lost. In the early hours of December 3, 1984, inhabitants of Bhopal woke up to chaos, screaming, coughing, and death.
Tragedy in central India. It happened while much of the city of Bhopal was still asleep. The Union Carbide pesticide plant on the edge of town suddenly began to leak.
Over 40 tons of lethal methyl isocyanate gas, otherwise known as MIC gas, leaked from the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal because water used to clean pipes in the plant had mixed with the MIC gas in a storage tank, serving as the trigger for the deadly gas leak. Within hours of the leak, a massive gas cloud swept across Bhopal, a city of over 500,000 people. Estimates of how many people were killed and affected in the initial days after the disaster range from 2,000 to as many as 15,000 people.
Figures have wavered around over the years. Just recently, for many years, what you always saw in the newspapers was around 3,500 people. Local activists always said it was more around 10,000. And that, I wasn't there at the time, but I was told that that was based on indicators like the number of body bags sold locally. But the number has crept up over the years. And, you know, the reality is that we don't know. There were mass graves or cremations.
Several days after the accident, then Union Carbide CEO Warren Anderson traveled to Bhopal to see the terror firsthand. When he arrived, dramatic events began to unfold.
First, Mr. Anderson never got to meet the victims of Bhopal, or indeed his own engineers. He was whisked away in a police car to the company's guest house in the hills above the town.
Were with me and myself that we were charged with violations of several Indian laws, generally relating to criminal negligence.
Mr. Anderson had been arrested on charges of criminal and constructive negligence, offences carrying a possible 2-year jail sentence and, theoretically, no chance of bail.
Quickly, Anderson jumped bail, promised to show up in court when called upon, and raced back to the United States. Since that day nearly 3 decades ago, Anderson has never made any trips or court appearances in India. Although a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit was filed against Union Carbide, a settlement between Union Carbide and the Indian government was reached in 1989 for only $470 million. This settlement was based off a controversial estimate that showed that 3,000 people died and 102,000 people suffered permanent disabilities due to the gas leak. Anywhere from $370 to $500 was paid to each victim, which in many cases was not enough to pay for their medical treatment. When the settlement was announced, shares of Union Carbide stock increased by $2 per share. To this day, the Bhopal plant has never been cleaned up. Instead, it has become a toxic wasteland used by Bhopal's children for cricket and other games. Also, during the Bhopal plant's operation, toxic chemicals were disposed of into solar evaporation ponds, which have since mixed with local aquifers, contaminating Bhopal's water supply until the present day. The right of Union Carbide to seek out business opportunities in regions possessing a ready workforce and market for their products, together with the Indian government's right to encourage these investments to help their citizens who are trapped in poverty, is tempered by the ongoing responsibility of both to ensure the ongoing safety and security of the people and environment in the communities in which they operate and are elected to serve. There are several levels of responsibility for the tragic accident at the Bhopal plant and its aftermath, which is still felt today. First, Union Carbide failed to carry out its responsibility for ensuring the safety of its workers, the well-being of the people living near the Bhopal plant, as well as the surrounding environment. In the early 1980s, famine and crop failure swept across India, leading to decreased profitability at the Bhopal plant. Union Carbide executives then decided to put up the plant for sale. When no potential buyer was found, several production units of the plant were shut down, including the vent gas scrubber, a safety appliance that neutralized discharge of lethal MIC gas. The vent gas scrubber was turned off 3 weeks before the disaster, and other safety procedures at the Bhopal plant, such as the flare tower, which was used to burn off any escaping MIC gas, was turned off as well. There were also design faults with the factory that were never corrected. The design of the factory was created in the United States, thus showing a direct relationship between Union Carbide's United States headquarters and their Indian subsidiary.
They shouldn't have a large tank storage system so close to an urban population. And at the time, it was possible to have alternative plant designs that didn't involve that. If you have a high-risk operation proximate to a population, you're simply responsible for what goes on there. To say, and even if you accepted the sabotage theory that an individual worker directly introduced water into the tank, it shouldn't have blown up.
There were other accidents on the site. There, I believe in 1982, one or two workers died due to exposure to the chemicals on the factory grounds. So it wasn't a surprise that they were dealing with toxic and hazardous chemicals. There might be accidents.
Next, Union Carbide is also legally responsible for cleaning up the Bhopal plant under an international environmental law, which is followed by both the United States and India. Known as the polluter pays principle policy, this law states that the costs and consequences of pollution must be borne by those who caused it. In this case, Union Carbide, who owned and operated the plant at the time of the disaster, would bear responsibility for cleaning up the plant's site. In August of 1999, the Dow Chemical Company purchased Union Carbide for $11.6 billion. Dow's position is that while it purchased the assets of Union Carbide, it did not assume prior liabilities of the company.
For this one, they say, oh no, we didn't buy that we didn't get that liability in the deal. And the reason why is they say, well, the land had already been given to the government of India, or the state of Madhya Pradesh, where Bhopal is located. You can't just buy the assets and not the liabilities.
Finally, the Indian government also bears responsibility for the suffering that Bhopal's inhabitants continue to endure. Today, the Indian government continues to act irresponsibly. For example, notwithstanding the fact that multiple scientific studies prove that the water in Bhopal contains harmful substances such as lead, mercury, and nickel, many Indian politicians continue to publicly state that the drinking water in Bhopal is completely safe.
Years after that terrible tragedy, poisonous chemicals were still there.
No, there is no truth in it. There was chemical waste there, and it was decided that the waste would be disposed of according to the instructions of the Supreme Court. But there was nothing hazardous to human lives there.
They want more foreign companies to come in and invest and build factories. And if they create a climate that seems threatening to foreign companies who might be held responsible for pollution, then they won't invest in India. So it's a political or economic position they're taking, but one that impacts this case. It is how multinational businesses and governments do business. And they do business by passing off the cost of pollution to society.